Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, this week's special episode. It's a weekly political analysis show. This week, we're not going to be talking so much about politics. Well, we'll talk about it a little bit at the end, but instead, we're going to be talking about science, more specifically junk science, autism, and acetaminophen. So if you were not aware, President Trump's controversial health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is a vaccine skeptic. He's been highly critical of vaccines for the last 10 years or so, and recently he announced the cause of autism, which they are linking to acetaminophen, not vaccines, which came as a bit of a surprise to me. I was really expecting it to be vaccines. So we're going to kind of talk about vaccines, why people think that they cause autism, proving that they don't. Well, you can't really prove these things, but show that the evidence has shown it has not caused autism. And most importantly, we're going to talk most about the acetaminophen and the recent claims that the president and the health secretary have made. And then very lastly, I was able to get Robert F. Kennedy Jr. onto the show to answer some of my questions. So it's going to be a very interesting episode. Please stick with us until the very end. So you might be wondering, how did we get here? Where are we at now, and where might we be going in the years to come? So let's go back into history a little bit. In February of 1998, a man named Andrew Wakefield released a paper that stated the MMR vaccine was the apparent precipitating event, those are his words, for autism in children. The research was carried out in London, and it was published in the British medical journal, The Lancet. The paper reported on 12 children with developmental disorders. At a press conference, he stated, "I can't support the continued use of these three vaccines, the MMR vaccine, given in combination until this issue has been resolved." And at the time, the press covered it with mixed interest. In March 1998, a panel of 37 scientific experts set up by the UK's Medical Research Council found, quote, "no evidence to indicate any link," end quote, between the MMR vaccine and autism in children. However, Wakefield did not stop. In the early 2000s, he continued to publish papers stating the vaccines were not safe. Now, a real scientist would have ordered another study with more than 12 test subjects. However, Wakefield is not a real scientist, and I will explain it later. The damage was not insignificant either. In 2003, a study from the UK of 366 family doctors shows that 77% of them still advised giving the MMR vaccine, 3% didn't. So by then, 3% of doctors were not, and in 2004, the numbers rose a little bit. Wakefield resigned from the Royal Free Hospital, where he conducted his research, and he went to the United States in 2001 to conduct even more research. In 2004, Wakefield was accused of a conflict of interest. The UK Sunday Times reported that some of the children in the original 12-person study were recruited via a UK lawyer to prepare the lawsuit against MMR vaccine manufacturers. So see the problem here? Well, let me go a little bit further. In 2006, the Sunday Times reported that Wakefield was paid over £400,000, which is about $500,000, and in today's money that would be probably close to $750,000, and he was paid by the lawyers in the case. So it seems the lawyers paid a doctor to make a fake study to use as evidence in their lawsuit. It turns out in the mid-90s, this guy also tries to claim that vaccines caused Crohn's disease. And the Lancet issued this retraction in 2004. They said, "We wish to make it clear that in this paper, no causal link between the vaccine and autism, as the data was insufficient. However, the possibility of such a link was raised, and the consequent events have had major implications for public health. In view of this, we consider it now to be the appropriate time that we should get together and formally retract this interpretation placed upon these findings in the paper according to precedent." So you can imagine Wakefield was not very happy about this. He sued several agencies, including the UK's Channel 4 News, and that was dismissed. He was charged with being paid to conduct a study. He also ordered an investigation without the prerequisites required. He acted dishonestly and irresponsibly, according to the lawsuit, in failing to disclose how patients were recruited for the study, conducted a study without ethics approval. He purchased the blood samples from children present at his son's birthday party, and, quote, showed callous disregard for any distress or pain the children might suffer. He denied all the charges. Of course, he was found guilty, and in 2010, the UK's General Medical Council ruled against him, and in May 2010, he was stripped of his medical license. He has maintained his innocence ever since. I'm not going to get any further into him. We've already given this man more attention than what he deserves. So has any studies been conducted since the fake 1998 study? Yes. In 2002, in Denmark, They reviewed records of 500,000 Danish children born in the late 1990s and determined that 440,655 had been vaccinated. They also found that there was no increase in the risk of autistic disorder or any other autistic spectrum disorders among vaccinated children compared to unvaccinated children. They also found that the age of vaccination did not change the results. The study is linked below. More recently, there was another study also in Denmark of children of vaccines containing aluminum inside of it, which is supposedly the thing that causes autism. And after studying children born between 1997 and 2018, which is a 21-year window, that they said, by analyzing data from more than 1 million Danish children, we found absolutely no indication that the very small amount of aluminum used in childhood vaccination program increases the risk of 50 different health outcomes during childhood, and that includes autism. This study is also linked below. Okay, in science you can never disprove something, but it's very clear that there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism. Any evidence that existed in the last 25 years has either been retracted, like in the Lancet, or it has been fabricated. And according to Zoe Gross, the director of advocacy at the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, she said that we've gotten better at diagnosing autism. And she has said, quote, the rates of autism without intellectual disability is increasing faster than diagnosis of intellectual disability, which shows that if that group would have been missed in the past, is making up a part of a larger increase in diagnoses. So what does that mean? It means the percentage of autistic people in the world has stayed roughly stable. We are now able to detect it better now. As Gross states, when she told The Hill back in June, autism was not in the DSM. Being diagnosed in the 1940s and 50s was very rare, and only a few doctors knew about it. The first diagnosis was in 1943, and do we think autism only began in 1943? No. And by the way, Tylenol didn't come out until like the 1950s. And back then, people who were non-speaking or who had a very low IQ were put into asylums, and they were often left there, including Rosemary Kennedy, who was RFK's aunt. She always had a very low IQ. She was otherwise a very healthy lady. She may have had autism, we don't know. Rosemary's family would have been advised to institutionalize her. Actually, they were, and they didn't. They believed that she was best at home, and I think modern medicine would agree. Then Rosemary, she was lobotomized, which is basically opening someone's brain and cutting the connections. And she was rendered completely incapacitated, and she remained in I believe she was in an asylum for the rest of her life until her death about 20 years ago. It's a very sad story. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., he saw his Aunt Eunice found the Special Olympics, and his cousin, Anthony Schreiner, founded the Best Buddies International Group. So he got a front row ticket to seeing these institutions as a young man and how horrible, not only how horrible asylums were, he got to see his own family create things that would help these people. And he says today that these things didn't exist back then, which is obviously not true, and he knows that. To say that these things didn't exist back then before vaccines is quite horrifying, and it's shameful. So, do vaccines cause autism? In conclusion, no. So how is Kennedy involved? Well, he makes unsubstantiated claims like, in any just society, we would be building statues to Andrew Wakefield. And isn't that crazy? After I told you everything I told you about him, hopefully you realize how crazy of an idea that is. In 2015, Kennedy said, people who advocate for safer vaccines should not be marginalized or denounced as anti-vaccine. He said, I am pro-vaccine. I had all 6 of my children vaccinated. I believe that vaccines saved the lives of hundreds of millions of children over the past century, and that broad vaccine coverage is critical to public health. I want our vaccines to be safe as possible. So that was what he said in 2015. And that's, in my opinion, that's fine. It's not a take supported by science, but that's fine. However, in 2023, he said, no vaccine is safe and effective. So if anything, he's gotten more extreme over the last few years. He ran in 2024 against Joe Biden. Then he ran against Trump and Biden-Harris. Then he dropped out and endorsed Trump. I talked about this last year in my episode about RFK. Back when he was an independent, one of my friends went to an RFK event, and I don't know if it was a rally or a town hall or whatever, I assume it was a rally. He said that his estimation is that 90% of the people there were anti-vaxxers, and 10% were actually interested in a third-party candidate. So my friend was in the second group. He was not an anti-vaxxer. So RFK become for president was never really about him becoming president, and I think I said that back then too. He had no chance of winning, and I had people in my comments. You can go look at that episode. They were like, "Oh no, he's gonna win," and I was like, "No, he's not." So his candidacy was always about vaccines. Trump announced in November last year that RFK would become his new HHS secretary, and since then, like much of the administration, he has moved rapidly, promising to make America healthy again. So that is a brief view of RFK and his takes over the last 10 years or so. So this is the guy President Trump put in charge of our health and human services. It's fantastic. And that's sarcasm, as you can't tell. As for Trump, he said vaccines work. He said they're not controversial at all, and I think they should be used, which is quite confusing. So the recent announcement was not about vaccines, although there was some sentences that alluded to it. How did they get to acetaminophen? And, well, Scott Gottlieb, who is the FDA commissioner under Trump's first administration, said that exploring the relationship between Tylenol and autism is worth of further study. But he also said there's no clear evidence that autism in children of women who consumed it. And we would need large-scale trials to prove the correlation, and that would take years, and I imagine a decade or longer, to be totally sure. However, here's a good rule of thumb. If you're going to make a claim without evidence, we are going to dismiss it without evidence. And since they've made this claim without evidence, I will dismiss it without evidence. And not only everything I've said, but this administration came into office only about 9 months ago. There's no way that they could have set up a controlled study and completed it by then. This administration is so new that even if they got a bunch of ladies on January 21st and told them to make a bunch of babies, these babies wouldn't even be born yet, much less be able to be diagnosed with autism. So that is where we are at the moment. So anyway, I took the liberty of getting a very special guest on our show. Secretary Kennedy is here to answer some of your questions about vaccines, Tylenol, and more. So Secretary Kennedy, thank you for coming on the show. Secretary, does Tylenol or vaccines cause autism? For years you said vaccines caused autism, but what is the pivot? What's the pivot now?
They can both cause autism as they both have toxins and chemicals.
Okay, all right. I told our viewers you previously stated that we should be building statues to Andrew Wakefield. Do you still believe this?
Yes, I very much do. He was one of the only people brave enough to speak out about the toxins and chemicals that make people autistic and vaccines. If I were president, I wouldn't just build statues. I'd try to put him on Mount Rushmore.
The
He should become the
secretary
new prime minister of the UK.
is Nick Andrew Wakefield.
Yes, he'd be better than any Labour or any Tory.
Secretary, previously you claimed that people with severe disabilities didn't exist before vaccines, and President Trump has said it's a tremendous horror show, but your own family members, like your Aunt Eunice, have founded the Special Olympics, and you watched your cousin Anthony Shriver found Best Buddies, as I explained to our viewers. Clearly, there were people with intellectual disabilities prior to very recently, and you were there to witness this. So what's up with that?
Next question. There are brain worms that are eating my brain. They make me forget things because they keep eating my hippocampus. So, next question.
Okay. What about people who are very high functioning and otherwise have very mild case of autism? You said these people, in your words, will never pay taxes or have a job. Isn't that very dehumanizing?
No, it's not dehumanizing. If you're anything short of completely neurotypical, you're subhuman. You're a medical mistake who should be lobotomized.
Secretary, I'm going to show our viewers a picture of me drinking a bottle of Skittles juice, and it's full of Red 40. What do you have to say to that?
It's liquid Skittles full of Red 40. How could you? That's basically like taking cyanide. You have 5 minutes to live before you get killed by the toxins.
Okay, all right, I'll report back on that. Secretary, switching topics, here's a clip of for our viewers about your heroin addiction. Do you stand by this?
And I was at the bottom of my class. I started doing heroin. I went to the top of my class. Suddenly I could sit still and I could read.
Taking heroin to focus, you struggled for 14 years from this addiction. How could you say that this was justified?
Well, true all natural heroin is a much better treatment for attention issues than Adderall because it's natural, it's from nature, unlike the shit you get from big pharma, which is full of toxins.
The secretary, before we came on the before we came on the show, didn't you say that when Charlie Kirk was killed that it wasn't blood that came out, it was red 40?
Yes, I don't believe that was blood. I believe that was a red 40 deposit that built up in his windpipe. He would have survived that bullet if not for the toxins and the red 40 making his neck extra vulnerable. At his funeral, I compared him to Jesus Christ.
What do you have to say to parents of autistic children?
They should do what my grandfather, Joe Kennedy Sr., did to my Aunt Rosemary, lobotomize them and institutionalize them so they're more successful children like my father and my uncle's going to have a future without that horrible burden in the way.
So, Secretary, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I do, Robert. From one Robert Jr. to another, I do have more recommendations for public health. I would like to speak to the Secretary of Agriculture and tell him that we should stop watering crops with water, but instead water them with Gatorade and other sports drinks because they've got what plants crave. They've got electrolytes. Also, I've discovered the best detox solution is to not have any food or water for 2 weeks with a lie in an open field yelling photosynthesis, photosynthesis. I call it the sun detox. One final piece of advice: the best way to strengthen your immune system without relying on vaccines or big pharma is to just expose yourself directly to the pathogens. One of the best ways to do this in our modern world is to go to a homeless encampment in California and lick them, and lick the homeless. Tell your children to lick the homeless to strengthen their immune system. It's better than any vaccine or anything from big pharma.
Didn't they do that in Idiocracy?
No, I've never seen that. What are you talking about?
Okay, all right, that's enough for today. Thank you for coming on the show. I think our viewers have learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I gotta go. The worms are eating my brain again. I put brain worms in my brain to eat the toxins, but they keep eating my brain. There are brain worms in my brain.
All right, good luck. Bye. Okay, that was interesting. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye. And no, that was not actually Secretary Kennedy.